I woke up to the sound of buzzing, not the usual, comforting hum of my bees, but something more frantic, more angry. At first, I thought it was just another morning in my little paradise of honey-making, but then I saw it. My jars. My precious, golden jars of honey. Gone. The wooden shelves where I had carefully placed them were nearly empty, save for a few sticky smudges and a single overturned lid on the floor. My heart pounded as I ran to the window, and that's when I saw her. Karen, my entitled, boundary-stomping neighbor, smugly loading the stolen jars into her SUV like they were groceries she had paid for. She didn't even bother to sneak around. No guilt, no hesitation. She wiped a smudge of honey off the lid with her sleeve, licked it off her finger, and smiled. The audacity of that woman could power a city. My hands clenched into fists, and a dozen possible reactions raced through my mind. Call the cops? Confront her? Release the bees? The last option seemed extreme, but at that moment, I wasn't against a little nature-backed justice. Karen had always been a thorn in my side. She was the type who thought fences were just suggestions and other people's property was up for debate. She had taken my garden tools, borrowed my wheelbarrow for months, and once even threw a party that ended with a broken gate and an overturned beehive. That day, I had to chase down a cloud of bees for hours, calming them like an overworked mother. But this was a different level. My honey wasn't just some backyard hobby, it was my livelihood, my pride, my passion. And Karen had stolen it like it was a free sample at the grocery store. I stormed out the back door, fully prepared to unleash the kind of verbal wrath that would make a sailor blush, but by the time I reached the driveway, she was already backing out, waving at me like we were old friends. "Thanks for the honey," she called, flashing her too white, too fake smile. "It's amazing. You should really sell it at the farmer's market." I stood there, stunned, my brain trying to process the sheer level of Karen-ness I had just witnessed. Sell it at the market? Sell it at the market? She had stolen my honey and was now giving me business advice? As her car disappeared down the road, my mind went from shock to strategy. I wasn't just going to let this go. No, no, no. I had a rule. Mess with my garden, I'll scowl at you. Mess with my bees, I'll give you a warning. But mess with my honey? You just declared war. I walked back inside, my anger simmering into something sharper, something more focused. If Karen wanted honey so badly, I'd make sure she got it, just not in the way she expected. I had an idea, a beautifully ironic, slightly evil idea. But first, I needed to check on my hive. The bees were restless, their usual gentle buzzing tinged with irritation. They could tell something was off. Maybe they had felt the disturbance in their sacred honey supply, or maybe they just sensed my mood. Either way, they were with me. I leaned against the hive, looking out over my backyard, formulating the plan. Karen was predictable in the worst way. She took without asking, assumed she was above consequences, and never, ever admitted when she was wrong. That was about to change. Because if she loved my honey so much, I was going to give her more than she could handle. The first step? A little preparation. I needed the special honey, the one infused with a certain blend of natural pheromones. Normally, I used it to help guide lost bees back to their hive, but today, it had a new purpose. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining Karen's face when she realized what was happening, the slow, dawning horror as she realized the bees weren't just visiting. They were targeting. I was giddy with anticipation. The next morning, I set my trap. I left the jar in the usual spot, right on the shelf where she had stolen from before. I didn't even bother hiding it. If there was one thing I could count on, it was Karen's greed. And sure enough, by noon, she had struck again. But this time, things would be different. An hour later, as I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, I heard it, the distant, high-pitched shriek of someone in distress. I set my cup down and walked to the fence, peeking over just in time to see Karen flailing wildly in her backyard, her brunch guests scattering in terror. The bees had arrived. At first, it was just a few, drawn by the irresistible scent of the honey she had so generously smeared all over her charcuterie board. But then, as if summoned by the universe itself, more began to arrive. Dozens. Hundreds. Karen was screaming, running in circles, knocking over tables and bowls, her perfectly curated backyard descending into chaos. I watched as she tried to swat them away, which, of course, only made them angrier. Her guests were fleeing, shielding their mimosas as they sprinted for the house. One man dove into the pool, a dramatic leap worthy of an action movie. Another tripped over a chair and rolled into a hedge. Karen? She was still running, still flailing, still absolutely covered in bees. I should have felt bad. Really, I should have. But as I stood there, sipping my tea, watching karma do its thing, I couldn't help but smile. It was beautiful. Poetic. Justice in its purest form. And the best part? This was just the beginning. Karen had no idea what was coming. After watching her flee from her own brunch like a villain in a cartoon, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Karen never backed down, never admitted defeat. She wasn't the type to learn from her mistakes. No, she was the type to get angry, to blame others, to seek revenge. And I had no doubt that after she finished icing her stings and wiping the remnants of her disaster brunch off her overpriced yoga pants, she would be plotting her next move. Which meant I needed to be 2 steps ahead. The thing about dealing with people like Karen was that you couldn't just win once. You had to win in a way that made them never want to play the game again. And that required a level of patience, strategy, and just the right amount of chaos. Fortunately, I had all 3. I spent the rest of the day fine-tuning my plan. Karen thought she could take my honey without consequences, so I decided it was only fair to give her what she wanted, just with a little bonus she hadn't anticipated. My bees weren't just regular bees. They were disciplined, intelligent, and most importantly, they were mine. Over the years, I had learned how to work with them in ways most people couldn't even imagine. I prepared another special jar, but this time, I upped the ante. The honey wasn't just infused with pheromones. It had a particularly potent blend, one that would make Karen the most interesting thing in any area with bees. This wasn't just about attracting a few curious visitors. This was about making her an unavoidable beacon. I left the jar in the same spot, predictably within reach, and waited. Sure enough, Karen took the bait. She must have waited until she thought I wasn't home, but I knew better. I watched from my upstairs window as she crept into my yard, moving quickly but clumsily, stuffing the jar into her oversized purse like a raccoon stealing from a picnic. She barely glanced around before hurrying off, which told me everything I needed to know. She was furious about what had happened, but not enough to stop herself from doing the exact same thing again. I sat back, smiling to myself. Now, all I had to do was wait. Karen didn't just take the honey this time. She flaunted it. I overheard her bragging to her friends on the phone as she sat on her back patio, practically shouting so the whole neighborhood could hear. She was planning a do-over brunch, and she made a big point of saying that she had plenty of honey this time. The way she said it, smug and triumphant, made me shake my head. Some people just never learned. The morning of her brunch, I made sure I was outside, tending to my hives in full view. I wanted to see this unfold in real time. Karen had set up another elegant backyard spread, complete with ridiculous flower arrangements, expensive table settings, and a guest list full of people who didn't actually like each other but pretended to for social clout. The honey was placed front and center, drizzled over pastries, mixed into drinks, showcased like a trophy. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. People were eating, laughing, pretending to enjoy each other's company. But then it started. 1 bee. Then 2. Then 5. Then a dozen. At first, Karen ignored them, swatting lazily, assuming they were just a minor annoyance. But within minutes, it became clear that this wasn't just a few wandering insects. This was an event. The bees weren't just showing up. They were arriving, like they had received a formal invitation and weren't about to miss the party. Guests started noticing. People